Hello everyone. I think I have so far one person joining this tour. Please let me know if you're there because YouTube just shows me the number, no names. And we're gonna start in about 2 minutes. Oh, we have the second person joining. Hello Lily, welcome back. And more people. Hello everyone. Hello Cynthia. It was kind of a last minute thing. I added it yesterday because the premiere was yesterday at the same time and it was a huge success. And I thought that we can repeat it today because the forecast was excellent. And it would be a shame to lose such a great day, a rare day with the sun and blue sky and not experience it. Lovely clouds, lots of sun, beautiful sky, but to be honest, I recovered from high blood pressure just 2 hours. So in case I am slow a little bit during this tour, I do apologize. But I will try my best. Okay, I think the multiple cathedral bells have told me that it's time to start our tour, but let's wait for a few more seconds. Perhaps more people will join us. The sound is coming from this thing in front of us. Okay, let me flip the camera, quickly introduce myself, and we will start. Hello everyone. Hello, welcome to Berlin. Thanks for finding the time to join me. Hello Susan. Hope you've been enjoying your holiday. So for those of you who, just let me know if somebody's on my tour for the first time so that I do an introduction. Otherwise I can skip it because I know that at least 3 people who have joined me today are my followers who I know pretty well. So I can go straight to the tour's content. And today we're doing the new part of Berlin's city walks. We're gonna explain the UNESCO Heritage Site called the Museum Island. But, hello Cindy, but I wanted to start this tour with a little bit of a surprise, and we are actually starting not from the island of the museums, but from the rooftop of the Royal Palace or City Palace, which we have seen a lot from the outside during a number of city walks. But you've asked at some point to be taken to the rooftop to enjoy the views. The weather is gorgeous, so I thought, why not? So here's a little bit of a surprise. We're starting the tour from the rooftop of the City Palace, these days known as Humboldt Forum. And again, I do apologize if I am slow today at some points because I had very high blood pressure just 2 hours ago. So as always, I'm happy to answer your questions, although a little bit briefly during the walk and in more detail at the end. Now, let me flip the camera and let's start. So we are on the rooftop of the city palace, reconstructed city palace, which is also called Humboldt Forum. As I get outside and you see the palace, I'm sure you will recognize it because we saw it during the number of city walks. We're looking at the TV tower located on Alexanderplatz, at the tower of Red City Hall, Rotes Rathaus, and the spires of the Nikolai Church, located in Nikolai Viertel, in the city's oldest quarter. That's where the city's history started. We were there during the City Walk Part 1. We're gonna be there tomorrow, the same time as today. These were once the royal stables. That's where the kings kept the horses. These days, the building belongs to the City Academy. The building next to it is the oldest known residential building located in this neighborhood. It belongs to the middle of the 1600s. And this area once belonged to the trading settlement known as Köln. In 1300s, Köln and Berlin united and established the joint settlement. Berlin was there, Köln was here. In 1700, the joint town became known as the city of Berlin and the capital of the Kingdom of Prussia. You're looking at the 6 communist era apartment blocks built in 1970s by the communist government. They were presented as the first skyscrapers, residential skyscrapers in East Berlin. And all this area, during the time when Berlin was split into East and West Berlin, belonged to East Berlin and the GDR. This is a refurbished communist era building. During the communist times, it belonged to the city government. After the reunification of Germany, the building was refurbished. This part of the facade belongs to the old royal palace, which was once there. And these days, it belongs to the Technology and Business School. In 1918, Karl Liebknecht, the leader of the first communist party in Germany, announced the first socialist republic of Germany while being in this building. The sound is coming from this thing. And as you can see it yourself, we're on the roof of the city palace next to the dome. The original city palace was badly damaged during the Second World War. The remains were demolished by the communist government, and in its place, the communists built the Republic Palace, the government building. In the early 2000s, the communist era building was demolished and the palace was reconstructed, including this dome. Lily sounds like African, there's no description. This building belongs to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Next to it is the canal of the Spree River. We walked around this part of the city during the City Walk Part 5, which we did in March. This structure, which looks as part of the old building, is actually a monument to a building academy or architecture academy, which was established there on that spot in the early 1800s by the most prominent city architect, Karl Schenkel. And today we're going to talk a lot about him during the tour. Karl Schenkel also designed this church, which we saw at the end of March. The dome all the way in the back belongs to the Reichstag building. Some of you may remember we were inside the dome in February when it was still winter. And the two identical domes belong to the German and French church located at one of Berlin's iconic squares, Gendarmenmarkt. We were there at the end of March. The tower is on Alexanderplatz, which was the main square in East Berlin during the GDR. Lily exactly the same. And that avenue in front of us is the most famous avenue in Berlin, Unter den Linden. We'll walk down this avenue in March. We're going to repeat this walk this coming week, I think on Tuesday or on Wednesday. And we're going to walk Unter den Linden till the Brandenburg Gate in May when we're back to Berlin. In front of us is the Museum Island. Originally, it was called the Spree Island. Over there is the canal of the Spree River, and to the right is the Spree River itself. And this Museum Island is actually the place which we're going to explore during our today's walk. And this is a UNESCO heritage site, included by UNESCO into the list in 1999. And here is the great view on the largest in Berlin Cathedral, known as Berlin Dome. And I actually plan on repeating this walk in May when we're back to Berlin, and I plan on taking you all the way up to the terrace of the dome, because the views on the city from there are even better. Well, I thought it would be a shame to lose such a great day, such a great weather, and not to repeat this walk. And since I know that many of you follow my Jewish walks, if you look straight ahead, I'm sure you can see the Golden Dome, and I know that many of you can tell me the place it belongs to. Any ideas? I'm talking about that Golden Dome, the New Berlin Synagogue. And now I have one small challenge. I'm going to give you last view on the city. Barbara, thank you. I'm going to give you last you on this part of the city and then head to the elevator. And I need to take the elevator to get down. And for a minute, you can lose me, but then when I'm on the ground floor, the connection will resume and you will get me back. Lily, that's the synagogue, the New Berlin synagogue, which we see during the 2 Jewish walks. And yesterday, during the Jewish tour, we explored the neighborhood of the early Jewish settlers, starting from the courtyard behind these communist-era apartment blocks. So that district was known as Spandau district, and that's where pretty much the Jewish history of the city started.
And then we could maybe like go from here to the restaurant.
And if you heard in the news about the big thing for fishes, which broke in a hotel in Berlin, it was in December, and it was all over the news. So that happened in that hotel. Now, let me go inside the elevator. I'll go down to the ground floor and we will continue the tour. But while I'm in the elevator, you can lose me for about a minute. But then the connection will resume. Please wait for me.
You get this here, I would never go speak German. It's such a hard language.
And that's the entrance to the restaurant. And now I'm standing in line, waiting for the elevator. Once it comes, we're gonna go down to the ground floor. While in the elevator, you will lose me for a minute, but then the connection will resume. Cynthia, we're waiting, not yet. And here we go.
Now, then you told me, don't do the apparatus.
And here we are on the ground floor of the City Palace, also known as Humboldt Forum. Lily, that's wonderful. Then you can really study and learn Berlin. And now once I'm in the courtyard of the palace, I'm sure you will recognize where we are. Many of you may remember this building. And now we're going through this arch and heading towards the Museum Island, also known as the Museuminsel, the UNESCO Heritage Site since 1999. It features a stunning complex of 5 museums which have collections of art from the antiquity to the 19th century. Pretty much they host 6,000 years of art. And this beautiful road in front of us is Unter den Linden. We're gonna repeat this walk, iconic Mitte, this coming week. And when we're back to Berlin in May, we're gonna do the new episode of Berlin City Walks and walk Unter den Linden till the Brandenburg Gate. And let me turn around and show you the palace and the rooftop where we were. We were all the way up there. Lily, exactly. So in 1451, the ruler of Brandenburg province, an old Berlin settlement, originally belonged to Brandenburg province, decided to move his capital from Brandenburg to Berlin. Of course, he needed a place to live, so he built here his first residence, which looked more like a castle, and it was built exactly here. And of course, that castle had a small royal chapel. In the following century, in the 1500s, the castle was replaced with a Renaissance palace, Renaissance-style palace, and the chapel was turned into a church. In the early 1600s, the rulers of all German states involved themselves into the war, which lasted for 30 years. It brought all of the German states to bankruptcy and resulted in millions of human losses. The war ended in 1630, and as a result, the local royals didn't have money to upgrade the palace. But they had enough money to turn a small, narrow road, which the royals took to get to the hunting forest, into a grand avenue planted with 2,000 lindens. So Unter den Linden appeared in the middle of the 1600s. And across the road from Unter den Linden, over there was a kitchen garden where the royals were growing vegetables for their kitchen to cook. In the late 1600s, the local ruler decided to elevate his status and made himself the King of Prussia. Berlin became the capital of the Kingdom of Prussia, and of course the new king needed a palace to match his new status. So he built a grand Baroque palace. This is its reconstructed replica. It was built in 1700 and became the most magnificent royal palace out of all German states. The dome was added in the middle of the 1800s. Once the Baroque palace was built, of course, the king needed a big church to match the new status of the city and the kingdom. So the Baroque church was built here. But some 130 years later, the Kingdom of Prussia became the German Empire. And in order to emphasize the status of the empire, the emperor decided to demolish that Baroque church and design a new grand cathedral. Construction work started in 1890s and finished in 1905. And it became the largest church in Berlin the largest cathedral in Berlin, Protestant cathedral, and the counterweight to Catholic St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican. The church was badly damaged during the Second World War. The domes were destroyed completely. The interior was destroyed during the city's aerial bombings, but the outer wall somewhat managed to survive. And then after the war, this area became East Berlin. Reconstruction works of the cathedral started in 1975. And in fact, they involved lots of demolishing. For example, the communist government requested or ordered to take down as many crosses from the cathedral's exterior as possible. They also demolished the only part of the cathedral which managed to survive the war bombings, and that was the church, the pantheon of the last ruling dynasty. And of course, the communists didn't want any pantheon here. So the pantheon, the memorial church, was demolished. In 1980, the wedding and the baptism chapel were open. And then the restoration works of the nave started. And they finished in 1993 when Germany and Berlin were reunited. Still today, lots of restoration works are going on. The plan is to bring the exterior of the cathedral back to its original look. These days, it's one of the most popular parks here in Berlin's Mitte, in the middle of Berlin. Its history started with that kitchen garden. In the middle of the 1600s, when the king decided to expand a narrow hunting road into the Grand Avenue, which became known as Unter den Linden, his wife, who was a Dutch princess, decided to turn the kitchen garden into a beautiful park with a landscape. The park was designed in the second half of the 1600s, and it was called Lustgarten, or the Pleasure Garden. The grandson of the queen, who had a very military mindset and was very much into wars, teared down the trees here. Catherine, it's at the bottom of the description to the tour. And sorry, I cannot type in a chat while giving the tour. That's one of the drawbacks of YouTube. So the grandson of that queen who designed this park teared down the trees and turned it into the marching field for his troops. The next king was more into parks and not that much into wars, so he turned it back into the park. And it remained being a park up until 1918. In 1918, the last emperor abdicated, and this park became the place of major public demonstrations. Here were socialists, communists. In 1933, the first and the last big protest, which consisted of about 500,000 people, was held here against the Nazi Party. In 1942, the Nazi government, that was during the Second World War, organized here an exhibition which was called the Soviet Paradise. The objective of the exhibition was to show poverty, starvation in the USSR to justify the beginning of the war. That exhibition was attacked by a resistance group who was headed by the Jews. 27 Jews were arrested and tortured to death in the Nazi prison. After the war, when this was part of East or Communist Berlin, there was no park here. In 1990s, after the reunification of Berlin and Germany, the park was recreated. And this park is actually the entrance. I will let you hear the bells and then I will continue. The bells are coming from Berliner Dome, the largest cathedral in the city. And when we repeat this walk in May, I'm gonna take you to the terrace all the way up there. And while listening to the bells, let me show you the beautiful architecture of the dome. Okay, let's continue. So this park and the cathedral serve as the entrance to the Museum Island, named so after the complex of 5 museums. And this complex was included into the UNESCO World Heritage list in 1999. So in the second half of the 1700s, the era of Enlightenment started in Berlin and Germany, Prussia. The main objective of Enlightenment was to make art, culture, and education affordable to people. Before that, they were privilege of the nobility. The Enlightenment era continued in the early 1800s. As a result of this period, the ruler decided to open his private collection of paintings for public. And of course, it needed a place to be exhibited. So the king hired the most important city architect who worked in Berlin in the first half of the 1800s to design the first building of the Royal Museum. And that's what you're looking at. The building was designed by Karl Schinkel. Remember, from the top, and we were all the way up there. From the top of the palace, we saw that structure, which is the monument to Karl Schinkel's Construction Academy. So Karl Schinkel was the main city architect in the first half of the 1800s. He worked in the most popular at that time neoclassical style. The building of the Royal Museum was designed and opened for public in 1830. And at first it exhibited the royal collection of German and European masters. These days, the museum is called Altes, or Old Museum, and it has Greek, Etruscan, and Roman art, sculptures, jewelry, and collection of coins. have the final look on the palace, on the park, and on the cathedral before we move further into the museum island. So the collection of art kept growing, and some 20 years after the first museum was opened here, it became obvious that the second museum was needed. The student of Karl Schenkel, Friedrich Stuhler, designed the second building of the museum. Once the second building was opened in 1850, it became known as the New Museum, and the first museum became called the Old Museum. And this is the building of the New Museum. Opened in 1850, designed in neoclassical and neo-Renaissance styles. These days, it houses the collection of Egyptian art, collection of the Near East art, the papyrus collection. The highlight of the exhibits of this museum is one piece, very famous piece of art. And now I have a question to you. Does anyone know where the bust of Nefertiti is? You know this famous sculpture, the bust of Nefertiti, the Egyptian princess. So there, Lily, good memory. The bust of Nefertiti is there. And that's the highlight of this museum, and that's what attracts millions of tourists yearly to visit this museum. So this was the second museum opened on this island. In 1871, the Kingdom of Prussia evolved into the German Empire. 4 German states got united, kingdoms got united and established the German Empire. Berlin became the capital of the German Empire. And a citizen of Berlin, a citizen of the Empire, the citizen of Prussia, and an ethnic Jew, a wealthy banker on top of that, decided to present his private collection of paintings that consisted of Cindy, I don't know, maybe before the 6 o'clock mass or service, because that's quite a long ringing, but then it's Sunday service. So anyways, once this banker presented his private collection that consisted of 262 paintings to the city, the king, the emperor, ordered to build the third building of the museum to host this collection. The painting gallery, and this is what that is, was opened in 1876. These days, besides this original gift, it has the paintings of Monet, Manet, and Renoir. Also the famous sculpture of Rodin, the thinker. And you may have noticed that the gallery looks like a Greek temple. And that was the idea of the architect. So that student of Karl Schenkel wanted to build here the sanctuary for art, and science on the Spree Island. Since 1780s, the local rulers had a vision here to turn Berlin into Athens on the Spree. Hence, neoclassical style became extremely popular. It all started with the Brandenburg Gate and pretty much ended here at the complex of museums. And of course, that man sitting on the horse, that's the emperor. Yep, and the flags of Ukraine are on every government building and on every public museum. And here is the Spree River. And this part of the bank of the Spree River is one of the most popular places for locals, for residents who live in this neighborhood, to come and hang out when the weather is nice and when it's a weekend. And now be prepared, those of you who are into taking screenshots. That's quite a view. I would say one of the iconic views of the city. Let's continue. So the old museum, the new museum, the highlight is the bust of Nefertiti, the painting gallery, which these days also has the collection of Impressionists. It's over, I believe. And if you didn't believe me that Nefertiti is in the new museum here, that's the poster, which proves that she is here in a special room, of course. Let's continue. And of course, it's one of the most popular places for a photo shoot. So in 1871, 4 German kingdoms got united to establish the German Empire. Since Prussia was the main kingdom, the most influential and powerful kingdom, Berlin became the capital of the German Empire. But in terms of museum collections, pieces of art, sculptures and paintings, Berlin fell behind Munich and Dresden. So that's why during the days of the empire, the emperors really focused on building the collections of art and elevating Berlin's status as the center of the museums and culture in the empire. So the collection was growing. The excavation works, which were conducted by historians and archaeologists, were financed by the wealthy and by the royals. As a result, in the late 1800s, it became obvious that more buildings will be needed here. Lily, if you're talking about the period when Berlin was split into East and West Berlin, 3 of the museums here were somewhat restored by the communist government and reopened. Some of the collections were still here in East Berlin. Some pieces of art, in fact, a lot of pieces of art, were taken as trophies, mostly by the USSR, and then returned to Germany, but some are still kept in the museums in Russia. For example, the famous Trojan gold is in the Pushkin Museum in Moscow. But on the other hand, for example, in the Neues Museum, there is a collection of Crimean gold, including the famous Crimean golden tiara, which was looted by the Nazis from Crimea during the war. Also, when Berlin was split into East and West Berlin, some of the collections ended up being in West Berlin and were exhibited in the museums in southwestern part of Berlin. So this James Simon Gallery is the last sort of gallery which has been added to this museum complex recently. And it happened in 2019. And it's named after James Simon. Well, who is James Simon? Well, he is the biggest donor to this museum complex. In fact, thanks to him, Berlin has the Nefertiti bust. So who was James Simon? James Simon was the Cotton King of Berlin, an ethnic Jew, a citizen of Berlin and Prussia. In 1860, the Jews here were granted with equal civil rights. They were made citizens of Berlin and Prussia. A lot of them had become quite wealthy by that time, and they really wanted to contribute to the city and to the country where they were citizens. So he became one of the major donors of this museum complex. He donated, basically, he presented the Nefertiti bust, which was in his private collection, to Berlin and to this complex. That's why the gallery is named after him. And this is the canal of the Spree River. Two more museums were opened on this island in the first half of the 1900s. The last museum, which was built here in 1930, was the famous Pergamonmuseum, and that's in front of you. It was built in 1930, exactly 100 years after the first museum was built here. That's the most famous, the most visited museum on this complex. In fact, when I just came here to Berlin for the first time, my aunt told me that every educated person needs to visit the Pergamon Museum. So what attracts people to this museum? Well, the famous Pergamon altar, the Babylon Ishta Gate, and the 17-meter high, which is about 60 feet high, market gate of the ancient Greek town Miletus. Sorry, I cannot show you the pictures today because yesterday after the tour I dropped my old phone and it died completely. And today is Sunday and nothing works. So I couldn't even go and print out the photos. But for the next tour I will be ready. I do apologize for that. So the Ishta Gate, which is pretty much the height of this building, just think about it. They put together 17-meter high, 60-meter feet market gate of the city of Miletus, and the Pergamon altar are kept in these two buildings. Yeah, Lily, it is on Wikipedia, but it's nice, you know, to be able to show photos while actually being on the tour. This is one of the oldest buildings here on the Spree Island, which with some restoration works managed to last till our days. Lots of buildings here in Mitte were destroyed during the city bombings in the Second World War. And the way it looks, it's a typical look of a wealthy residence built in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And that's the original entrance into the Pergamonmuseum, which is now closed because of all these reconstruction works. And the last museum, which we're going to see today, is on the most northern corner of the Spree Island, and it's known as the Bode-Museum. So in 1871, the German Empire was established. Lots of its historians and archaeologists were involved in archaeological digs carried out in North Africa, Near East, Middle East. The excavations and archaeological expeditions were financed by the rulers and by the wealthy citizens. And the emperor was very much interested in these excavations because they elevated the cultural status of the city. That's the canal for small boats. So the collections of art kept growing. And in 1905, the fourth museum was built here on this island. And of course, while you're in Berlin, you gotta try Berliner currywurst. A glimpse at the local flea market, and we will continue. That's for those who are nostalgic of the communist era stuff. Some jewelry, sunglasses, but that's the end of the day for them, as it was yesterday. And it's a bit smaller on Sundays than on Saturdays. Old books, old CDs. And we've now reached the most northern part of the Spree Island. And the final museum we're going to see today is this Bode. Cindy, they say that some, especially those who are in East Germany, elderly people, they are. That's what I was told. So the Bode-Museum, built in 1905 by the most famous at that time city architect in neo-Baroque style. And once it was open, the same James Simon, the same wealthy Jewish merchant and a citizen of Berlin and Prussia, who was actually on good terms with the emperor, presented more than 10,000 pieces from his private collection of art, mainly Renaissance and after Renaissance period, to this museum. He was a good friend of Wilhelm von Bode, who was at that time the director of this complex. He wanted to share his private collection with people. He wanted to contribute into the city and its cultural image, and he presented more than 10 pieces from his private collection. Some of them became exhibited in one room, and the way they were placed in that room was exactly the way they were placed at his house. And this room became known as James Simon Cabinet. When the Nazis took it over, it became absolutely prohibited to mention all the names of the Jewish donors. The James Simon cabinet was closed by the Nazis completely. And in fact, it was reopened just recently in the early 2000s. So we walked around the museum island just to make sure that you understand that we're on the island. This is the Spree River. We're now at the most northern point of the island. And the island features 5 big museums, which present collection of art that covers 6,000 years. Also, the buildings belong to the 4 most prominent city architects who represent 4 generations of architects in the city. The first one was Karl Schenkel, neoclassical. The second one was his student, Friedrich Studer, who built 2 buildings, the New Museum and the Old Painting Gallery. The third architect was Ernst von Inne, who designed the Bode-Museum. And the last one was Pergamon, which is all the way down there, built by Alfred Mesel. So 6,000 years of art on just one island. The buildings designed by 4 architects, which represent 4 different generations of architects in the city. Pretty much all of these buildings were badly damaged during the Second World War, but to a different extent. The New Museum was destroyed pretty much completely and was the last one to be rebuilt here. The Old Museum was in the best condition and was the first museum which was reopened by the communists. Then they also reopened the National Art Gallery and the Pergamonmuseum. The Bode-Museum was reopened only in the early 2000s after major reconstruction works, as well as the New Museum. So 3 out of 5, to sum it up, were opened by the communists. 2 more were opened after Germany's reunification. And now, if you have a spare minute, I would like to walk to that other bridge and give you the perspective view on the island, the Spree River and its canals. And this looks to me like a Turkish bazaar with the leather, the fur.
How much is this?
And here is another iconic view on the city. The northern end, top of the museum island, the Spree River and its canal. As my family members say, in order to be able to live in this part of the city, in Mitte, you had to move here, or you had to come here in 1990s, right after Berlin's and Germany's reunification. That's when real estate here was affordable. Now, it's like Manhattan. And it's the most happening, the most booming part of the And those of you who follow my Jewish tours, that's the dome of the New Berlin Synagogue. Once the Jews became citizens of Prussia and Berlin, they commissioned the architect to design the new building of the synagogue, and they put him a requirement. The dome of the new synagogue had to be seen from any point in the city. And those of you who are into screenshots and taking photos during the tour, here we are, another iconic view of the city. And this is the end of our today's tour. Thank you so much for finding the time to join me today. Thank you for coming back to join me for this tour. And for comparison, compare the architecture that you've just seen with this communist era apartment block. That's communist era. But now, these apartments cost a fortune. So those of you who are doing screenshots and active in the Facebook groups of our voyages, I would appreciate if you can share the feedback and the photos of the tour. We need to attract more people to see Berlin. The new episode of Jewish Berlin is scheduled for April 28th. On April 29th, we're going back to Krakow, and we're gonna do the city walk. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I lasted till the end of the tour, so thank you and see you later. The City Walk Part 1, Nikolai Viertel and iconic Mitte will be done this coming week, pretty much the same time as today. Stay safe, healthy, and continue exploring. Thank you all. See you later. Gotta go.